Okay, so good afternoon. I'm Donna Frazier, Vice President of CARU. Welcome and thank you all for attending the second session of CARU's virtual conference titled Solving Challenges with Social Media and General Audience Platforms that Appeal to Children. We have a great panel for today's session, but before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items to cover. First, please note that all attendees' microphones are muted. This session, like all of the CARU virtual conference sessions, will be recorded and made available online. So soon after this session, attendees will receive an email with information on how to access that recording. If you are having any technical issues, please email support@bbbnp.org. Here's just a quick reminder of the upcoming and very engaging CARU conference virtual sessions. I encourage you to go to caruconference.org for the most up-to-date information about each session, dates, and times. And lastly, I want to thank all of our sponsors, Google, Hypershift, Keller and Heckman, Microsoft, Super Awesome, Venable, Manat, Baker Hostetler, and last but not least, Davis and Gilbert. We truly appreciate your support of CARU and BBB National Programs. At this point, I'd like to hand things over to our moderator, Po Yi. Thank you.
Good morning, or good afternoon for, I guess it's good morning for us, good afternoon for us, and good morning for those of you in the Pacific time zone. I'm an advertising partner in the New York office of Manat, Phelps & Phillips. I've spent decades practicing in all areas of digital advertising and content production, both in-house and in private practice. I am joined today by three distinguished speakers. Matt Vidal is a product counsel at Google and is a lead counsel for YouTube Kids. Matt has spent the majority of his career providing guidance on children's digital privacy and advertising regulations, including Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA, the Children's Television Act, and the FTC Act. Matt also specializes in compliance with children's commercial matters on YouTube Maine, as well as parent experience across the YouTube portfolio. Harry Joe is a co-creator of Mother Goose Club, which he produces with his wife Sona at their production house Sockeye Media. Harry is a YouTube pioneer, achieving many firsts in the kids space on the platform. Today, Mother Goose Club is a cornerstone of YouTube's family vertical, with a family of channels that have been watched over 15 billion times and have amassed over 10 million subscribers. Harry is also a 3-time Emmy Award winner. Kate Dirana is a director of content at Spark Foundry and leads the strategic partnerships and content team for Campbell's on behalf of Spark. Kate's team is charged with creating, producing, and distributing brand-forward content with partners beyond the traditional media placements and buys. Kate has worked on several groundbreaking and award-winning branded content projects. So I'm old enough to remember when YouTube, Facebook, and other social media platforms were launched and COPPA was enacted. I was practicing law. I was just a young lawyer back then. I've watched the explosive growth of these platforms to become the primary sources of communication and entertainment for many people of all ages, including and increasingly children, including children, my own children. According to a new study on kids' app usage and habits recently reported in TechCrunch, kids ages 4 to 15 are spending approximately 80 to 100 minutes on YouTube and TikTok per day, two of the most used apps by kids. As you can imagine, during the recent months when we have all been sheltering in place due to the coronavirus pandemic, kids' usage of these social media platforms, which are meant to be general audience platforms, have increased significantly. In today's virtual session, we are going to be exploring challenges in safely and effectively working with social media platforms that appeal to children. To start, I will turn over to Matt to take us through advertising for children and family on YouTube services, followed by Harry and Kate, who will provide their individual perspectives as content creator and agency working with brand advertisers. So with that, Matt, take it away.
Couldn't hear me. I did start, but I didn't have my unmute, so my fault. Technology, the new world. So thanks, Po. I appreciate it. It really is a pleasure to be here. On behalf of Google and YouTube and myself, thanks to CARU for inviting us to be a part of this. We love having these dialogues with you guys. And as you said, Poe, the conversation is super relevant now more than ever because we have seen such an uptick of, viewers on our platforms. The YouTube Kids platform has been downloaded, astronomically high since the beginning of all this started. And on YouTube Main, we're continuing to produce content for parents and teachers as resources to help them sort of navigate this time as well. So yeah, I think it's a very important topic for right now. During my time with you today, I think there may be a list of things I'll talk about on the next slide, but during my time, I'm going to talk about a little settlement you guys may or may not have heard of last year that happened with the FTC and YouTube. And I'll go over some of the measures that we took over at YouTube to address that settlement and the concerns raised by the FTC. I'm going to particularly focus on how those changes have affected advertising on content that's been made for children. And ultimately, which I think is going to be most relevant to this audience, I'm going to talk about how advertisers should be thinking about our platforms when they are creating campaigns that are intended for parents, families, and or children. So we can go to the next slide. Next one. All right. So yeah, I mean, little tiny thing that blipped in the news in September last year is that, we had a settlement with the FTC and the New York Attorney General's office for allegations about our violation of COPPA. And the allegation was that we were collecting personal information, including targeted advertising, primarily targeted advertising, from viewers of child-directed content, videos that were child-directed, without first following through with all of the requirements that COPPA has in terms of providing direct notice and collecting verifiable parental consent and all of that. We can go on to the next slide. And so through our conversations with the FTC, we obviously first started off pointing out that back when, 2005, when YouTube was created, genuinely, it was created as a general audience platform. It was created with college students and young adults that were sort of posting inane things online, right? And so that's how the platform was viewed. That's how we created it. That's how we developed the features for it. And in 2015, we really took a special eye towards kids and what we could and should do for kids, and we made YouTube Kids as a platform that wasn't just COPPA compliant, but also took into consideration, age-appropriate content and parent settings and safety controls that, outside of privacy, again, it sort of had a comprehensive picture for a product that was really intended for kids to be navigating individually, unsupervised. We continue on YouTube today to not allow anyone who says that they're under 13 to access the service. And it's not possible for folks who are familiar with our ad tools and our ad interfaces. It's not even possible to actively target, any demographic in the under 13 age group. But, the conversations with the FTC did raise concerns that we understood. There's been a shift in the digital landscape since 2005 when we did first launch YouTube, right? We've always known that parents like watching content with their kids. We've known it. They say it. They talk about how they put YouTube on and sit together as a family. We've also seen a great rise in content creators like Harry and others that make really good family content and is very successful on the platform. And mobile devices generally, like the proliferation of mobile devices, that just changed the nature in which viewers consume our content, right? And so kids now have much easier access to a particular device. It could be even the parent's device, likely it is, right, to view content in ways that we weren't originally thinking about. And so, it really did get us thinking and acknowledging that consumers are maybe not using our products the way we sort of towed that line and have created them for. So we take that very seriously and, took a look at our practice. And the whole conversation with the FTC just gave greater clarity to how the FTC views a general audience platform's obligations when that general audience platform has some content that could be appealing to children, right? And that hadn't been so clearly articulated before. As you guys probably know, the FTC just recently closed a public comment period on the effectiveness of COPPA. And one of the things they were looking for comment on was exactly this point. What should be the considerations for general audience platforms like YouTube and Facebook and others, right? And Google and YouTube submitted comments. I'm sure a lot of the folks on this call did as well, and we continue to look forward to having that conversation about sort of what does this really mean in the world of social media moving forward. So we can go on to the next slide. And practically, as a result of the settlement, what happened was we instituted a checkbox, a user interface for creators to be able to indicate to us when they've created content that is made for kids. We call it MFK, made for kids, right? And they can do it when they upload a new piece of content, or they can go back into their library of existing content and indicate whether the intended audience is for kids or for not. And that will carry with it a series of changes that we've made on the platform. You'll see there's an effect on the user experience, and there's an effect on the ads. What YouTube basically does is anyone that engages with content that's now been marked as made for kids will be treated in a COPPA compliant manner. Even if we believe or in fact know that someone is an adult because the age of their account is 45 or whatever it is, even when we know that, we're going to, we do presume that the user is a child because of the nature of the content, and we treat all data collected accordingly. We're using machine learning to help us identify some videos that are clearly kid-directed, but generally we're deferring to the creators because they know their content best, and it's not practical for YouTube as a platform to sit down and look at and determine the nature of every type of video. But if our machine learning does detect some sort of abuse or error, there is a potential to override an audience setting. We've done a lot to help educate the creators because this is clearly going to be a huge burden on them. We sent out some education emails, we've published some help center articles, but ultimately we continue to sort of point folks to the FTC published resources and to finally consult their legal counsel to determine whether their content is made for kids and can carry with it all of the effects that come along with it. So I'll talk about the ads experience in great depth, but let's talk about the user experience. We'll go on to the next slide. So this is just sort of a snapshot. It's not a comprehensive picture, but a general snapshot about the kinds of things that we changed for the user experience when a video is now marked as made for kids, right? First and foremost, now we prominently have a disclaimer, or not a disclaimer, but a little module there for YouTube Kids to remind folks that if this is going to be something where a kid is now going to be watching on this device for a while, perhaps they should be looking on YouTube Kids. And then we've also disabled certain features that, like I said, were originally conceived for a general audience platform. Things like comments, adding to a playlist, and notifications, right? Those are all things that are now deprecated on, amongst other things, on made for kid content. And obviously, we'll dive deeper about how ads have been restricted to just contextual ads. We can go on to the next slide. And we, as I said, we've been publishing articles and publishing guidance about all of this. We know that these changes have had an impact on the creators, right? First and foremost, and they do make such great content for kids. So when we had these negotiations with the FTC, we really tried to push for a runway of time to let the creators know what was going to be happening, to prepare them so that they could really ramp up and sort of be in a good position here. We've also committed to a $100 million fund that'll be dispersed over 3 years so that kids creators can continue to make good content globally, despite the revenue hit that they're going to be experiencing with this. We can go on to the next slide. Now, when it comes to advertising, right, this entire venue, Donna and I have talked often, this entire venue knows advertising to kids is permissible, right? It's absolutely permissible and legal when the content is safe and age appropriate, right? And the technology complies with applicable laws like COPPA and other privacy laws. And it's necessary. It's necessary for a lot of the creators who provide free content. So for content that's MFK now, we personalized advertising, and we only allow contextual advertising. Personalized advertising it looks to sort of demographic data and or your behavior over time and across different sites in order to make sure that the ad is targeted particularly to your interests. Whereas contextual advertising is more like a magazine ad or a TV commercial is what I like to think of, where it's sort of just paired to the type of content. And the advertiser sort of just hopes that the demographic that they're aiming to reach is watching that type of content, right? We can go on to the next slide. So for clarity, on MFK content now, as of the beginning of the year when these changes took place, only contextual ads are eligible to even serve on MFK content, right? So that means certain features like how many people watched my ad, or frequency capping measures, right? Or geo-restricting because this ad isn't relevant in Canada, right? Things like that that are par for the course in terms of contextual advertising are still allowed on MFK content. But what's not allowed is the personalized advertising. Folks who are familiar with the Google tools, at least, and I'm sure it's similar with some of the other ad tools out there. But when an advertiser checks any of the campaign targets for demographic or affinity or interest-based, right? Things like that, remarketing, right? Anything like that, if an ad campaign makes use of those technologies, the creative won't even be eligible to appear on MFK content. And to just be really clear, what that means is that when a video is MFK, that watch page has a variety of inventory spaces that can be filled by an ad, right? There is what's called a pre-roll ad that comes up before a video. There can be mid-roll ads, which is an ad that comes up in the middle of a video. There can be display ads that appear sort of in the sidebar of your viewing pane. There are what's called true view ads, which pop up on top of a video as you're watching it, right? There's a bunch of different inventory that's available. And if any of those ad creatives make use of personalization features, they just are not even eligible to appear on that page, to be served in that inventory slot. So it's also very important to point out, right, the settlement and the investigation had everything to do with privacy, right? It was COPPA, the Children's Privacy Protection Act, and data collection. And so that's what the majority of our response measures took into consideration. But obviously, we wanted to take additional steps and put content policy restrictions on the types of ads that can appear to kids too. Because now that this was being declared as content made for kids, we decided, you know, we should make sure the ads are actually appropriate as well. What we currently do is just map to our ad policy restrictions on YouTube Kids. And so if a particular vertical is restricted there or prohibited in YouTube Kids, it would also be prohibited on a Made for Kids video on YouTube Main. But, you know, we continue to look at our policies. They're always evolving, and you know, we update them pretty frequently. We can go on to the next slide. Now, for this audience, right, we want to talk about how you should be thinking about YouTube and its platforms in order to reach the permissible audiences that you're aiming to reach, right? So you should really think about it in terms of three potential audiences, right? There's parents when they're watching with their kids, and there's kids, right? So as a platform, not with regards to advertising at all, but just as a platform, we continue to say that YouTube Kids is the intended destination for children under 13 when they're watching alone, when they're watching unsupervised. So if someone intends to just hand off their device to a kid and let them go and watch videos, we as a company still say that YouTube Kids is the appropriate platform because of things like parental controls and safety and things that can gauge the experience that the user is going to have. And it's a pretty great app. I'm gonna just pat ourselves on the back here, right? Like we have a sizzle. Who doesn't love a sizzle? Can we show that sizzle? So you can really see sometimes folks don't appreciate, but there really is a wide variety of content that is available in YouTube Kids, and it's a very popular app. There's over 25, we're not going to quite go into this slide yet, There's over 25 million weekly active users. We continue to invest in the product frequently. Recently we just changed, we just updated within the past year the process and the quality of content that gets incorporated into the app. And so now every channel in the app has been human verified and vetted against a set of strict on-brand heuristics. So for that reason, when we think about our 3 demographics, when an advertiser really wants to construct a campaign that's reaching children, they have to do so contextually, and their best bet is to make a buy on YouTube Kids, because that's really the only inventory where we intend kids to be watching unsupervised. Now you can go to the next slide. So that's that first bucket, right? When they're really intending to get kids, that's the only way to contextually reach kids on our platforms. And then there's this second bucket of folks that advertisers may want to reach. There are co-viewing families, right? So parents sitting down and watching with their kids. We do have research that shows that particularly with our younger viewers on YouTube Kids, parents do sit down and watch with them. So one option is to continue to make use of the contextual tools available on YouTube Kids to reach that co-viewing segment, right? But now that MFK has launched and we have more robust feature sets, if you want to reach co-viewing families, you can make use of contextual advertising campaigns on YouTube main, right? Think of things like topics and keywords, right? The sales team is out there right now talking about a new tool that they've made called the Advanced Contextual Tool, which really makes use of metadata elements to help find the really relevant context for advertiser campaigns. So that's something that advertisers can consider when they do want to reach that audience of parents sitting down with their kids to watch this content on YouTube main. And then there's this third bucket of just adults, parents, people who are parents, right? If you want to advertise, Universal Studios, theme parks, vacations, things like that. And there, where you genuinely are trying to reach an adult, you will not appear on MFK content, right? But you can make use of the whole portfolio of tools that our ads inventory already has, right? And so you can check off the box that says you are looking to reach parents of a particular demographic in a particular market, right? All of the tools that exist in the ad world, you can use to reach your parents. And that's what we actually encourage folks to do when they're aiming to reach parents. Be very explicit and targeted that you're not reaching the kid demographic and you're trying to reach parents. Now, one last thing I'll mention, this is the paradigm you should be thinking about in terms of how you reach the audience you want to reach. But if there are some brands out there who just don't want to ever even happen to appear on a kids inventory or co-viewing inventory, we do have a tool that's called the Content Suitable for Families exclusion. When you create your ad campaign, you basically check a box that says, I don't want my ads ever appearing to kids. And in that instance, it just won't appear at all in any of those bottom 2. So that's one exclusion. But for the folks here that are thinking about advertising to the family and the kids audience, this is the way to really be thinking about our platform post changes from the FTC settlement. And I hope it's helpful.
Great. Thanks, Matt. That was a great presentation, and now we know much more about what to do and how to reach audiences on YouTube. It looks complicated, but it certainly goes to address the safety issues that the FTC was concerned about. So thank you for that.
We hope so.
So we're going to move over to Harry, and this is perfect to hear a content creator's perspective who obviously has been on YouTube, has been very successful of publishing content on YouTube. So I'd love to hear from Harry on all of this. Harry?
So just to kind of, before we launch into my slides, it's important to note that the FTC settlement really addresses ad targeting. It doesn't address directly the user experience on the platform. So there's a lot of discussion out there about child safety and making sure that the platform is safe for kids. And I think for people who are not expert in exactly how the platforms are constructed and what elements we're talking about here, the settlement really relates to how ads are targeted to kids, but not what is in the ads, and does not address the content that the ads are run against. So there has been press, about inappropriate content on YouTube in the past, or about the user experience on YouTube, but the settlement doesn't address that directly. What it does is it makes a number of changes to the environment that will indirectly have massive impact on the user experience. And so where I'm the perspective that I'm going to bring to this is basically what is that impact, and let's think about the actual user experience itself, and how we want to direct this ecosystem to best support families and children. Next slide. So one thing to note about YouTube is that it is the preferred destination for most families around the world to watch kids content. And that was really shown dramatically during the current coronavirus crisis. So there is a service called Social Blade that allows you to look at, say, a number of channels, and we went and looked at data for about a dozen leading channels in the space. And you can see a pretty significant spike starting in mid-February and really peaking in April and May. It has since sort of leveled off, and we're approaching, as stay-at-home orders are being lifted, the environment is normalizing a bit. But you can, if you were to say zoom out of this slide, you would see overall that the ecosystem has been growing quite significantly. So a lot of families are using YouTube, they're relying on the content, and I would say that that's for a couple of reasons. The content is distinctive. It's really different from any other platform that's out there. And because it's ad supported, it's free, right? There's more choice now than ever for streaming services. Many content libraries have their own dedicated service now. And yet you could see that during the COVID-19 crisis, there was a really dramatic spike in viewership among kids brands on the channel, or kids channels on the platform. And that's really because kids and families are in many cases choosing YouTube to watch their content. Now, if we go to the next slide, we can see that there were a couple of really dramatic drops. Most dramatic was the drop in December through January. And this is when the FTC settlement took effect, right? So the impact of these contextual, of removing behavioral ads, is that you had this really, I'm going to say, in many cases, over 60% drop in ad rates, attributable to the settlement, to the loss of behavioral advertising, even accounting for seasonal drops that occur at the beginning of the year. And of course, this is anecdotal, and there are some brands that were not as severely impacted, although every brand was meaning maybe it was a 40% drop. But you had many other channels that had rather even more significant 80+% drops in January. In that environment, and this, we had about 3 to 4 months as a community to prepare for the settlement. Many of us had been expecting this. We took some defensive measures. There were quite a number of layoffs, and people were reducing the size of their production slates. And in our case, what we did was we tried to produce as much content as we could for the first 6 months of 2020, in the last 3 months of 2019, with the view that, well, in an uncertain revenue environment, while we are still generating revenue, let's try to build as much of a we'll call it a content bank as we can, so that we can at least see what the environment looks like over the course of 2020. Of course, what none of us predicted was the COVID-19 crisis. And if you were to sort of add this particular CPM drop to what happened in March, next slide. There was basically another big drop in March over what were really low, historically low CPMs. So I would say pretty much every channel right now is looking at historically low CPMs. And I would say that if you were to blend the two drops together, you would find that most of us are dealing with about a 80 to 85% drop in ad rates. So notwithstanding the substantial increase in views in March and April, that increase was still not we'll call it a 400% increase. It may have been a 40% increase. And for many of us, we're off of pretty substantial view counts. The impact of 85+% drop for some of us in our CPMs resulted in in less than a year, a rather significant impact on how we can produce content and what we are going to do. So you had a situation where many channels have been sort of paring back, and then just as they were sort of assessing business conditions in 2020, we get hit with COVID-19. I think anecdotally, a lot of people think that because viewership has been so much higher on the platform, that every kids creator has been doing very well, and certainly it's mitigated the impact of of COVID, of the CPM drop to have more views. But I would say that many of us are actually doing worse and probably worse than ever. So what is the sort of policy impact of this? When you have a situation where the user experience that families are looking to get is really driven by the content. The settlement itself didn't actually impact what kind of ads. So it's not like children were being shown a particular type of ad and that is now being stopped. That's not what the settlement did. What the settlement did was it changed how ads were being targeted. So for many of us, the ads that we're seeing on the platform are still the same ads that we were seeing before the settlement. They're just reaching users in a different way. Because our vertical is now the cheapest vertical to advertise against on YouTube, probably, right? I don't know what the ad rates are elsewhere, but I imagine it's probably the cheapest vertical, and yet generates significant amounts of engagement and traffic, and you can get into the home. There's a significant amount of co-viewing. We've now created a situation where the content that so many families have been depending on just at a time when they need it the most has basically been defunded. And at the same time, this audience is now, you can now reach this audience for, massive discounts compared to every other vertical, and it's known. So if you actually do want to specifically target kids, there are ways to do it now using contextual, and you can actually do that. And so, one of the questions that I have is, was this a good trade for us, right? As a society, right? Are we better off removing these behavioral metrics and then severely impacting the quality and experience that literally hundreds of millions of families around the world are able to enjoy on YouTube for free, right? And keeping in mind that YouTube is an international platform. It's not just the US market that was impacted, but in our case, we have pretty widely distributed viewership, and I would say that's true for many of the larger channels on YouTube. The US only constitutes, less than 50% of our audience. We have significant viewership, all over Asia and Latin America and Europe. And so, in those cases, children's content that's in, languages, in all over, like, so for example, Korean language children's content was defunded, right? Language, like Brazilian Portuguese, that content was defunded, right? And the ripple effect of this is something that we're not yet seeing, given how close we are to the impact that we felt in January. But over the course of 2020, you're going to see a lot less content being produced by homegrown YouTubers. And what would this take us to? Well, the amount of money that we make on the platform, for most of us, especially the smaller YouTubers, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars to maybe $1 to $2 million a year. And this is enough to keep a 3-person, 6-person operation going that produces maybe about 2 to 3, 4 hours of content a year. This is in no way, that for a major media conglomerate would be less than the budget for one commercial, right? But for a 5-person team, it would produce them to provide, it would provide them with the revenue to produce, 2-3 hours of content. And those 2-3 hours of content will be very different from anything that you'll find from any of the major media brands. And when you aggregate that creativity across thousands of creators in every single language in the world, that is a truly powerful, unique experience that can't be replicated elsewhere, right? These are the creators that are going to be hurt the most and that have been hurt the most. I've spoken to a number of colleagues in the industry who have, especially in the animation space, where you do have to keep sort of a certain amount of payroll effectively going to keep animators and it takes, sometimes, there's a significant amount of lead time. So it's not like you're just getting actors together in the studio. You're not just taking your iPhone out to the backyard and filming a video. You actually need to sketch things out and work with the team. That content is going to be affected. And who will not be affected, for many of the bigger companies, this amount of revenue, a few $100,000 or a few $1 million is not going to be a significant amount of revenue for a multi-billion-dollar media corporation. In fact, I would say that for many of those corporations, YouTube and other similar platforms like the App Store are part of their promotional strategy. So it's not a primary distribution platform for them. Instead, it's a platform where they effectively advertise their other shows elsewhere and try to drive users, acquire users to then watch their real content on their main platforms, right? So they're not going to upload their full feature-length movies. They're not going to upload their entire series. They're not going to make all of that available for free. They're going to charge, $100, $200 a year in subscription services. But what they will put up is, teaser content or ancillary content to promote that. And as time goes on, our concern is that, the experience that people have is not, thousands of people like us who are creating specifically for these families in, 2, 4, 10, 15, 20, 50 hour chunks, but rather, dozens of hours of basically promotional content to them. That's not the actual main content that's designed to actually drive people to experience that content elsewhere. And, that's something of the dynamic we've seen in the App Store, and it would be a shame if that happened to you too.
Thanks, Harry. That's a very interesting perspective. I think what I like about this panel and we're putting it together is that we are getting different perspectives about what happened since the settlement. And now I'm going to ask Kate to provide related perspective, but I think it's the, as Harry talked about the effect of all of this on advertisers. Well, Kate represents advertisers, and Kate is involved with developing strategy for using YouTube and other social media platforms. So it'd be great to hear from Kate on sort of the brand and agency's perspective of this.
Sure, thanks so much, Poe. Hello, everybody. Happy afternoon. Thank you, Matt and Harry. You guys gave some great context into how this is applying to your guys' specific worlds. The marketing world is a little bit different, and it has its own little nuance about our version of what this looks like. I think I'll start with the idea that kids are really smart and technology moves really, really fast. And oftentimes law is a little bit slower to catch up with where sort of the world is moving. And we as marketers are then sort of forced into a world where we're sort of chasing the next big thing always. If we remember back in the day, I remember growing up as a kid and every single television network had Saturday morning cartoon and huge cartoon blocks, but then regulations came in around that, and that made that space hard to go. So we are constantly trying to find areas that we can meet kids in spaces that we want them to be protected. We want them to be looked after in the right way. But because I said, the law sometimes is a little bit slower than how we're progressing. It makes things a little bit challenging. I thought a really interesting point that Harry brought up that I'd love to talk on a little bit more is this idea of content creation and what that means for advertisers. In addition to kids being smart and being able to figure out how the next new TikTok trend or whatever it might be, they also know what an ad is. They are very well versed in what is their show and what is content and then what is an ad in that perspective. So when we really think about how do we measure our ad effectiveness and our measurement of did our ad campaign work, we really see the opportunity of There's the regular sort of standard placement ads, and then there's what we call branded content creation. And that would be us working with somebody like a Harry to bring our brand and our brand story directly into the content he is producing. But if Harry is no longer able to make money, right, we're all in the business to make money at the end of the day. If Harry can no longer make money because of regulations, and I now have less content creators to go to talk to about this, I have less opportunity to get outside of that traditional ad environment space. So it makes things a little bit interesting for us on that side. I think from a Google perspective and the Matt's perspective, in terms of the limitation or the regulations is the wrong word, but the guardrails they've put in place to really make it safe, and the made for kids content is really smart, and it really does meet the challenges that are put out by COPPA. But we haven't yet asked, is COPPA still the right level that we should be holding ourselves to? You know, is 13 a magic number, and have we pressure tested that against this new generation of kids that are digital native that come up in this environment? So I think that, you know, we're all trying to play catch up here, and then sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I think from a marketer perspective, where we're really looking at is getting to kids is becoming more and more challenging, and it's making it sort of harder for creators, platforms, advertisers alike to be able to tell that story. I think one of the other things that I'll mention here in this is we're talking a lot about COPPA right now, but the other thing that we should be mindful of is that's the law, and those are the regulations in the FTC. We haven't yet talked about industry and childhood advocacy groups that add another layer of complexity on this. So I work on Campbell's, and we represent several food brands that are in the kids space. Goldfish one that I'll take you through. Google has now accepted some of the guidelines from our Food and Beverage Advertising Alliance that we have, and by doing so have made it even, I've got COPPA at one level, and then I've got another level of industry advocacy guidelines that make it just one more layer to have to get through of how we're talking to these kids. So it makes it difficult, and we're talking about one platform. This is happening across all of the platforms everywhere, and the kid creator space is just shrinking. There's less of them. There's less TV. You're not having the Saturday morning TV blocks anymore. Kids magazines are not a thing anymore. All of these things we keep dwindling, and we're finding it harder and harder place to go, and then we add these restrictions on top of them. So what I'd like to sort of walk you through in the next couple slides is how, as marketers, do we think that we have to get around that and work through that to make sure that we're getting to kids in the right spaces and in the right times. So we can flip to the next slide. So here's where we are for Goldfish for FY21. I mean, I think the insight that is pretty easy that we all know is today's generation of kids consume media and interact with brands differently than generations past. And now more than ever, kids rely on digital platforms to play, escape, and explore their universe of choice. Additionally with this, what's really hitting us with COVID is now there is a seamless interaction digitally for all of kids' engagement. From education to home to entertainment, back to education, back to home. It's just one long stream of digital interaction. Whereas, you know, before COVID, kids would go to school and they'd be in school for 8 hours, and then they'd come home and they'd watch YouTube. There were breaks in the day. Now this is all just one seamless interaction. And how are we making sure that we are showing up appropriately and respectfully in the right places, and making sure that we're not infringing in places like education programming or that sort of thing, and making sure that we're finding that balance. So we're really looking at this in these insights in mind. We want to evolve and remain relevant by reaching kids where they are most leaned in and most excited to interact, and bringing content partnerships that will bring kids new and fully immersive opportunities where they can choose their own adventure of Goldfish. So Goldfish is all about empowering kids to choose their own adventure, and we took that brand narrative and sort of applied it to our overall strategy of how we're going to be looking at partnerships and content opportunities for next year. So if we want to flip to the next slide. This is a really dumbed down version, but we did all the research that went behind this to show what this is. But this was basically really looking at children's consumer behaviors as they are consuming content in their world. If you put a phone or a tablet and a TV in front of a 6-year-old, what is the journey and the stages that they take to get to the content that they like, and really being able to construct a plan that matches that all the way through in the right environments. It could be YouTube and Google, it could be Facebook, it could be TikTok. And how do we create dynamic advertising and dynamic creative and dynamic partnerships that hit those kids at each of those different times, but within the constraints of those individual platforms. So back in the day when you used to make one ad and run it everywhere, we're now in the situation where we're making 15 different ads for 15 different platforms for 15 different environments. And that becomes problematic from a brand budget side when all of a sudden my production dollars were here and my media spend was here. And now I'm going this way, right? Because I got to come up with so many new ads to go. So really thinking about how we're taking it through that kids viewing journey, if we want to flip to the next slide, and how this comes to what this really means for us, especially in the Google and YouTube environment and the contextualization, we've now really had to look at without a lot of data to back this up, because data resources aren't there to find out exactly what kids are viewing when, where, and why. We've had to sort of make some theories and some jumps to say, how can we be part of the contextual environment that we know that kids are interested in and engage in, and use that as our blueprint to say, okay, we know that they have a high interest in music. Maybe music was not part of our strategy before, but now I'm going fully after TikTok music campaign dance challenges. And so now I'm pulling all of my money, I'm making this up, but now I'm pulling all of my money out of Google and YouTube, and I'm putting it over there because that's where the contextually relevant environment is. So I think that we're showing here is that all of these layers and complexities drive for a very complex overall plan that is difficult to put in place, difficult to measure, and then difficult to see one true result because we're looking at it from so many different areas. That's not to say that we're not up to the challenge and we're excited about it. We certainly are, but it is, this is where we are today with this FTC agreement and settlement that we've made, but this is gonna happen time and time again as new technology come up. So we've redone the roadmap for today, but we're going to have to redo the roadmap for next year or the year following, or the next settlement that comes down and the next piece that we're looking at. So, we want to, again, we agree with all of the right things to do of protecting children's privacy. We want to make sure we're being very true to all of that. But, these are just the complexities that doing that impacts the overall world of the advertising, and then our dollars fund the Harrys and the Matts of the world. And so does that then impact those guys and how they go about their businesses? So it is a ripple effect all the way across.
Thank you, Kate. I just love hearing different perspectives. They are all related to the same issue of how to solve the problem, the challenges that were created. Thanks, FTC. You definitely made life interesting and difficult for us at the same time. So what's really interesting about what all of you said is that in the beginning, it seems like social media platforms like YouTube or digital sharing platforms had created sort of a democratization of the creation and broken down the barriers of entry, right, for creating content, distributing to a wide audience. But since the changes that were implemented by Google, YouTube as a result of the FTC settlement, maybe what happened, to Harry's point, is that the barriers have now gotten it's kind of gone the other way. It's become more expensive to create content. It's become perhaps, we don't know exactly what the true effect will be until probably after the pandemic is over, because I feel like everything has been suspended. So all the data that we have is not complete, and we have no idea how this is going to really have a lasting or long-term effect. But at the end of the day, if what Harry's saying is true, is that then creators like Harry will not be able to fund as much content as they used to, and then what happens, right? Does that mean that that there'll be more reliance on influencers, would the brands get more involved in the creation of content, or would it foster a closer relationship between Harrys of the Sakas of the world with brands? I'm not quite sure. I'd love to hear all of your perspectives on the shifting away from the initial trend of democratization of creation of content.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Harry. You're probably most excited.
I'd like to jump in on that. I think that with content being, significantly defunded, what you're, at the same time that, after, 15 years of development, you have this really substantial audience. I mean, the biggest kids audience in the world, coming to YouTube looking for an experience that they've grown quite accustomed to, and then a sudden kind of defunding of content has occurred in January with a second hit occurring in March. The users don't see that, right? So this is kind of an opportunity now for basically two groups. The first group would be those who are revenue agnostic. So this would be the big media brands that I was talking about. So if I were to have come up with a strategy to support the big media conglomerates in the digital space, I couldn't have come up with a better strategy than what the FTC came up with. It's almost as if there was some sort of conspiracy by the big media companies to make this happen, right? So that's competing with them. Its creator base gets defunded, and it becomes 85% cheaper to target this audience with ads, right?
The new conspiracy theory here now.
Right.
You heard it here first, guys.
Yeah, they can basically, just run ads for their services, add massive discounts, flood the content with flood the platform with more content than any of us could ever produce. I mean, again, we all have content libraries and we've been producing up until this year, but over the course of the next couple of years, will we be able to keep up, historically, not as a group, probably not. Not unless there's some sort of normalization in the space, right? And yet the fans will be there, right? The families will be there, and they won't realize that there's been this massive change, which then offers up, the next opportunity, which is for people who are creating content at a much costs per minute that are in line with these economics, right? So what would that be? That would be so it's much harder to produce animation, much harder to produce studio-produced content, which is what we do. But if you're still doing influencer type content, you're filming in your house, you're filming in your backyard, it's just you, your personality, you can sustain the volume of uploads. You can put up, hours and hours of new content every month. And, and that content is always done well on the platform to begin with. Are we going to see a situation where, that's the kind of it's basically a combination of just all of that plus what's effectively, advertisement for big media brands, that could very well be where we end up, in a couple of years, right? And that would be a shame.
Yeah, I mean, I echo that. I think that's right. The only thing I would sort of add, right, to your point, Poe, is that I don't think this is a new consideration to the regulators. I think there's a new generation of users and creators that are being affected. But back when COPPA was revised in 2012, when the persistent identifiers, when the definition of personal information was changed to include persistent identifiers, there were 2 rounds of comments at that time because so many people rightfully pointed out exactly what Harry's saying, which is, the small content creators are going to be the ones booted out. And when we say content, we don't just mean videos on YouTube, right? We mean apps in the App Store and, everything on the internet. So the FTC knew that there was a loud constituency that voiced that concern and they moved forward nonetheless, right? And so I think, yeah, like Harry said, this is an intended consequence of the regulation. And it's unfortunate because, yeah, it does seem to favor the bigger companies, right? At YouTube, what I think is also going to happen, if I could predict, again, this is totally me, not speaking on behalf of Google, but I I would think that it's going to shift that big company problem, right? Because we're trying to sort of take measures to help out these creators. Like I said, the $100 million fund, and we're thinking of other ways to help them, but we can, right? We're a big successful platform and we can. The smaller platforms aren't going to be able to do that, right? And so it's just going to shift that burden, right? I don't know what the right solution is, right? There's a tax to creating kids content, as one of my colleagues just said, yeah, I don't know what the right cocktail is.
And I think that from our perspective, what we like about the YouTubes, or what we like about any of the partners that we work with, is the variety and the breadth of content, because not all kids are the same, right? Kids are different. They have different ideas and different passions and all of those sorts of things. And what's so great about the Harry level world is they're able to create massive amounts of content fairly quickly in comparison to the big media companies. So if we take out all the Harrys of the world, what I'm left with is advertisers in UGC, which can come off as a little sometimes schlocky, or I've got really, really big things, right? I got nothing here in the middle that sustains me when a kid just wants to watch a video at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's where I think that becomes, without that layer, it becomes a much harder place for advertisers to have the conversation, because the content's not there that the kids want to watch.
Right. I just want to make one last point on this, which was, there were a couple of incidents a few years back that went to content safety, so what was actually in the videos. And the result of that was that all the YouTubers out there, including the ones that were not targeting kids, were encouraged, by the advertiser pullback, to try to make their content as accessible to general audiences as possible, right? So if you're a vlogger, you're a gamer, you're not targeting kids under 13, you're generally targeting adults. But at the same time, because the advertiser pullback, sent the message of, we want as clean of a platform as possible. Everyone tried to make their content as family friendly and as clean as they could. And I think that really elevated the platform. It elevated the content on the platform. A lot of creators that didn't have to make that type of creative change to their content did so, and that was a positive thing. The result of this settlement now is for all of those creators who are not targeting kids audiences, have to now go out of their way to make their content family unfriendly. Right? And again, we've only been seeing a few months of this change, but now they're not going to cover topics that might appeal to kids for risk of being seen as targeting kids. And even if they don't have to, they're going to make their content, and they're making their content edgier, using more adult language, covering more adult themes by design, right? And that's, again, another platform-wide change that is a direct result of this policy guidance from the FTC. And the result of that is, for creators that were sort of in the edge, who are targeting, we'll call it 8 to 12, the 8 to 12 segment, a significant portion of them are just targeting 16 plus. And there's a rapid kind of elimination of content in that space, right? Other than the big media companies that service that space, I don't know that there's anyone who's really interested in coming into that, right? Yeah. And that's not a positive thing for anybody.
So I'd love to continue this conversation. In fact, I had prepared so many more questions, but we are out of time.
Oh no!
Yeah, it goes to show how interesting and important this topic is. I would like to challenge the CARU folks to have the same discussion, same topic again in 6 months' time or 12 months' time to see how things have changed, how the world has changed, because it really is really interesting. A lot of things will change, and I'd love to just be part of that conversation again. So thank you again, all the speakers as well as all of the attendees.
Great.
Thank you so much, Poe, and thanks to the panelists, and thank you all for attending today's session. And we look forward to presenting next month's session to you on July 21st. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you all.